It's time once again to slip into your camo, grab your bow, and join us out in the field for another episode of the Up North Journal, presented by PSE Archery. The Up North Journal crew is knocked and ready to rock for another exciting adventure. So let's step outside and hit the trail.
This episode of the Up North Journal podcast is brought to you by PSE Archery,
Black Eagle Arrows,
Fourth Arrow Camera Arms,
Wind Scent Vapor Hunting Scents,
Killer Food Plot Seeds, Supplements, and Attractants,
Cabela's,
Spot Shooters,
Antler Action,
Family Tradition Tree Stands,
and Badass Slingshots.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Up North Journal podcast, everybody. I'm host Mike Adams, sitting in the cabin today with Dan DeFall. Yes, I said today. It is Saturday instead of Sunday.
Yeah, it's a little day early.
Day early, and
speaking of early, it is early, 10 o'clock.
yeah, it is 10 o'clock a.m.
A.M.
Had 2 cups of coffee, ready to rock.
Yeah.
Heading north, so we thought we'd get this show done early for you folks. So the live stream, actually, we're going to do a little different dynamics. You guys have to check that out as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's a little bit different. We're never the same.
No. We'll always try to shake it up a little bit, but we got to get in the woods, so to be able to do that, we're bringing you the show today.
That's right.
But today's show is going to be a little different. Dan, you remember last week I went and got to see a guest speaker.
Yeah, you decided to travel across the state and go see a guest speaker.
Not
just any guest speaker.
Shane Mahoney, conservationist. And if you're not familiar with his work or who he is, he's the modern day Teddy Roosevelt, I guess. Is
right,
what they equate
exactly.
him to. So
The modern day, yeah, exactly. And, interesting guy.
Well, we're letting Danny listen to segments as we go along here. We're going to have actually Shane, his speech that I listened to on the show, and we're going to break it up into segments and talk about it a little bit before and after. But just be patient with us because this was recorded in a lecture hall. It was recorded on my iPhone, and I've worked on the audio a little bit and got it to where it's you can actually listen and understand. But so just be patient with it. It's
yeah, you're gonna have to listen to it and get your ears on. If you got headphones, put those on, listen to it. But it's really good.
So without further ado, here was this last Tuesday at Michigan State University in lecture hall with Shane Mahoney.
I personally do not believe, nor have I ever believed, as far as I can remember, that there was any more important endeavor in human existence than this effort we call conservation. I do believe that it is not only one of the greatest ideas that we have ever promulgated, but I think it is probably the one that, as time proceeds through this 21st century, and long before we get to the middle or the end of it, perhaps many, many other people in both industrialized and non-industrialized nations of the world will come to agree and understand that what we do around and about and with this wonderful notion will determine the stability, the comfort, the quality of human life going forward, and it will also determine the richness of the wild others that share this planet with us. I think it is very important that I give you some understanding of my personal philosophy, which has matured over time. I haven't been a complete mushroom. I do learn a little bit as I grow in age. But it has never really fundamentally changed. And the most important thing you need to understand about what I'm going to say going forward is that I don't really see much difference between us and them. I am a person who has participated in the harvest of wild creatures because I come from Newfoundland and the culture there is a fishing and hunting culture, and I have done it outside of those circumstances. But I am not afforded the luxury of saying that they are so different from us, the moose I hunt, or the bear I hunt, or the birds I hunt, or the animals I catch, the fish I eat. I am not afforded the luxury that some have of believing they are somehow miraculously different from us, and therefore the experience is somehow different for them. I cannot be afforded that. I will not abide by that idea. I think it is manifestly ridiculous. And so I take my association with conservation and with the rest of the natural world extremely personal. This is to the disconcert of some and the uncomfortability of some, but I can assure you I'm not alone in these feelings, and I believe the more we are able to understand what we share with the rest of animate creation, the more likely we are to do good things for it. I am also, however, a deep believer in the necessity of ensuring the quality of life for human beings. I am not, despite my love for them, anti-human. On the contrary, I grew up in a culture where the great attributes of humanness, generosity, kindness, humility, sharing, cooperation, were extended and manifest every day of my childhood and every day of my life, in fact, there. I was born on the island of Newfoundland. I was raised on the island of Newfoundland, and I will die on that island, beyond any question. So just as I don't see any separation very much between them and us, I also, in a very strange way, also don't see any separation between us and them, or them and us, or me and all of that, humanity and the wildlife or the planet. That is my personal philosophy, deeply embedded. It might as well be trapped in amber because it is immutable and it will not be changed by any arguments that I have ever encountered. And just to safeguard it, I'm not going to read any more of my life or listen to arguments because it might change how I feel. My earliest experiences also don't explain what I'm going to say today. My earliest experience that I can remember, and I am told I was 3, was capturing bumblebees in jars of thistle bushes in the backyard of a house in a place called St. Anthony, the very tip of the northern peninsula of Newfoundland. There were no roads, and we were still traveled by dog team at the time. And I have only then a cascading series of memories of being with creatures all of my life. And like a musician or an athlete, I got to stay a boy for a very long period of time because I got a job when I grew up, and that job put me out in wilderness for almost 25 years on extended periods of time every year, where I lived with wildness. And all of that only reinforced more in me the capacities they have, the beauty they represent, the inspiration they convey, and the sheer desperate loneliness that would result if we were ever to lose them. Now, at the same time, our relationships with them in modern time have become subjects of great debate. Should we engage in one way or another? What should our roles in conservation be? What should our models be? So let me talk about another experience from Newfoundland, and this time that involves both fascinating animal species and the fascinating aspect of Newfoundland culture. As most of you probably know, one of the most controversial engagements with wild nature in the world that we know is the Newfoundland seal hunt. This was a practice that was carried out for 350 years out of necessity, because nobody would do it otherwise, out of necessity on the east and northeast coast of the island of Newfoundland, where men would go out in ships, jump over the side, and all day long would walk across floating carpets of pack ice that were constantly floating underneath them, where one false step as you moved across these floating pans meant you went down into an abyss of salt, cold water that killed you pretty much instantly. And you hunted seals on that ice, and you skinned them, and you eviscerated them, and you brought back the meat, and you brought back the pellets, and you hoped that you survived the 3, 4, or 5 week journey that represented. You lived in a circumstance of filth and cold and danger at a level that no one really who hasn't done it can appreciate. And it makes me marvel at the heroes, who so-called, who pretend that any kind of modern hunting excursion is such an incredible challenge. Well, I would like them to look at the black and white photographs from the 1930s and so on to see what a dangerous hunt really looks like. The end result, of course, of the controversies over seal hunting meant that eventually the seal hunt in Newfoundland became essentially something virtually lost. And at the same time, not long before, we experienced the collapse of the northern cod fishery. And so what happened in the homes, in the individual family dwellings, in the individual communities of that one culture, was that the men who were the ones who went to sea were suddenly at home with the ones who stayed at home to look after the home, the women in most cases in that culture. And they suddenly were completely out of their lives. And what they would do is they would get up early in the morning, the men, and they would go out to the wharves or walk around the communities, so that when the school bus came for their children would not see them sitting at the kitchen table, a sight they could never remember because their fathers were always gone before the light of day. And then the men would come home and they would stay there until such time as the school bus would come again at 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon. And then they would find something else to do at that time, so that it wasn't so manifestly clear that their lives had been undone. Undone, in the case of cod, by an excessive slaughter of the fish species. Undone, in the case of the seal hunt, by the protestations of people who had a very different worldview and managed to essentially stop that hunt, despite the fact that 7.2 million harp seals swim our waters.
Well, I told you it'd be a little bit different trying to listen to that in a lecture hall type setting.
Well, you and I don't know how big the lecture hall was, but
it was probably a 250 person lecture hall.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was probably 150 people there, 150.
Yeah, see, people wanted to hear him talk.
Yeah. So
and talk he started.
What do you think?
Okay, so it's an interesting story, about his background and how he said he's going to live, grow up, and die there, basically.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty profound.
Right. Interesting take towards the end there when he was talking about the cod industry and the seals and how they lived through it, and it was devastating when the cod got overfished, and
the whole industry collapsed.
But then that was something brought upon themselves. And the other part was society dictating something about the seals when, however it got hold of that they would go do this. Even though, as he said, it was 4 to 5 weeks that they were hoping that they would live.
Right.
This just wasn't and that's kind of the...
4 to 5 week seal hunt.
Right. And basically one wrong move, you're dead.
Yep.
And that's, you never hear about that.
No.
You just hear about how they go out on the ice, club seals and everything.
Yep.
And society, even though the cod industry wiped itself out, but the seal industry is still 7 million strong. But because it's looked upon as a society bad thing, it got canceled.
Yep.
I don't know if it got totally canceled or whatnot, but
I know we're in Alaska. A guy that we used to run with here on the Up-North Journal, Chip Hailstone, who's now on Life Below Zero. Him and his family on I believe it's on Nat Geo.
Yep.
If you watch that, they still harvest seals over there.
They have it's very strict.
Let me take it. They still kill seals. That word is ingrained in my head from society.
Don't want to go pick a seal?
No.
But very strictly, though, that they maintain it. I think she's allowed one.
Yeah.
They go out and she gets her one. Matter of fact, this episode was just on this past week.
It was. I watched it.
And
strangely enough.
Right. And, and she takes everything from that animal. Now go here to Newfoundland when they're going out clubbing seals, but because society said that's bad, they're really cute, you can't do that anymore.
Right.
But it was devastating to their
community,
well-being of the community. And then he goes on, as you listen, and how the parents, the men, made sure that the kids didn't see them sitting at the table.
Still teaching their kids, even amongst the devastation of their employment.
Right. That, hey, even though we're still getting up, going to work, you still go to work.
Yeah.
You don't sit home at the table, waiting. No, you get up, you go do something, and you maintain, and you keep going. You just don't fold up and that's it. But no, really, really good start.
It makes me wonder if his dad was a seal harvester.
I'm gonna bet it was either cod or somewhere in there.
Yeah, because he's definitely brought up in the outdoors and in the wild. You can hear it in his voice, his passion. The thing that really struck me is, we would be direly alone if we didn't have animals on this planet. If something were to happen and we were to lose our animals, we would be direly alone.
Right, exactly. We would be direly alone. And like he said, when he explained the 4 to 5 week period that they went through on these seal hunts, and he kind of laughs now when he hears the person say the hunting that they were doing was hard.
Right. Yeah. And he compares it to what these guys were doing.
Exactly. So, and how they traveled around the island by dog sled team. Now they just didn't hop in the car. But I think his parents, there's some effect from everything that went on that he lived through.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to throw it to a break here. We come back, we're going to listen to another segment of the speech.
All right.
We'll be right back after this.
PSE Archery has always dominated the speed category. Now, the most revolutionary cam system ever to hit the market has perfected the shooting experience. Introducing PSE's Evolve Cam System, featuring extremely high let-off capabilities and the smoothest draw cycle in history. No other cam system has ever delivered this level of total comfort and total control. Experience PSE. Experience performance.
Killer Food Plots have been helping property owners for over 20 years create premier whitetail habitat. Whether replenishing your soil with their all-natural Organics Fusion pellets or planting a premier KFP food plot seed blend to help your deer rebuild their bodies through spring and summer while supplying the much-needed high energy during and after the rut, you can trust that Killer Food Plots family and their products will help your deer achieve their full potential.
Hey, welcome back to the second segment of the show, and now we're going to join back in with the lecture with Shane Mahoney.
Some of you in this room are obviously still working your way early through the process of having a conservation agenda, a life, a career. And I set up these couple of small examples to try and impress the second great attribute of conservation, along with the fact that it is the most important idea we have ever conceived, and that is that it is extraordinarily complex, that involves the full range of emotions, of politics, of law, of differing value systems for people around the world, across the world, in a globalized world, and that the lives and livelihoods of people are intimately tied with the lives and livelihoods, if I may use that term, of wild nature, and that neither can really, at this point in time, really get along without the help of the other. Wildlife is no longer an accident on this planet, ladies and gentlemen. I can assure you, not in Africa, not in Asia, not on this continent, nowhere on this planet anymore is wildlife abundance or wildlife existence an accident. It will occur and they will be maintained by virtue of the decisions that human beings, at their best, in every culture and in every system, will make on their behalf, for them, in their interests, while at the same time recognizing that in doing so we can help ourselves, but at the same time we must restrain ourselves. I am always amazed when people talk about conservation as though it is something easy to understand, and as though you can be an expert in this business simply because maybe you have a goldfish at home, or because maybe you like to hunt ducks, or maybe because you're a rock climber, or maybe because you simply like to sit at the seaside and watch the dead jellyfish eventually float in. Well, unfortunately for the natural world and for all of us, I suppose, or maybe fortunately, conservation is a complicated business that demands discipline, time, effort, knowledge, expertise, and unbelievable commitment to really try and make a difference in it. That does not mean that conservation is the domain of elites, but it does mean it's a domain of the committed. Very frequently, in lectures the issues of leadership and the issues of why conservation matter arise. They may not be so explicitly detailed as it was in the actual title for this particular talk, but they arise everywhere. They arise in the media, they arise in lectures, they arise in classes, they arise in structured programs, because they really are the big questions. Why does conservation matter, on the one hand, and what kind of leadership do we need to achieve? I'm not going to dwell on the issues of why conservation matters beyond a few opening comments that I made, that it is capable of inspiring us. It is something we rely on physically and naturally, and it is something that enriches our lives, and that without a functioning natural world, we don't exist. Let us basically accept some of those arguments so we can get on to some of the other questions here. Let me only say, in the wake of that acceptance, if you agree, that we also must accept that the circumstances facing this planet, despite all the efforts of people in this room, of people like you in other rooms, at universities all over the world, in many businesses, in many homes, in many cultures, in many governments, despite the billions and billions and billions of dollars that we are spending, despite the incredible accumulation of science that we have, despite all of that, you only have to check the latest month of publications or the latest announcements from reputable conservation organizations to realize that we remain in a battle. We remain in a battle for the conservation of the natural world. It may be hard to think so when one can look at the slopes of mountains in Montana and see cloaks of elk moving slowly in the morning sun. But it is not hard to imagine when somebody tells you that the insect life of Europe has fallen by 65 to 70% in the last 30 to 40 years. It is not difficult to understand when you understand that in all of Africa, all of the fabled continent of Africa, only about 33,000 wild lions live today. And that the pressures upon them and other iconic species on that continent are extraordinary and demand everything that we can possibly devote to it to even halt it, let alone solve the problems. In the midst of all of that, it is possible for people to say, well, what can we do? What can we do with this massive, complex, difficult problem? What can I, as an individual sitting in this room, do? What can this university do? What can an organization like the Boone and Crockett Club do? What can the Nature Conservancy do? What can any of us do? Well, the truth is we can do a lot. And we have incredible examples all around the world. But we need not travel that far to understand that it is fully within the capacity of human beings to develop leadership and conservation that succeeds against all odds. We don't have to be driven just by passion and idealism, although I can assure you it doesn't hurt to have that fuel in your tank. Because we can also use empirical evidence to show us the achievements that can be made. Bill, in his kind introduction to me, references a period of time past in this country, the United States of America, when wildlife depletion was the norm, and when individuals who organized displays of the mounted heads and horns and forebodies of wild creatures from the American West and other parts of your country said to the citizens of the United States of America, come and see the vanishing wildlife of America, because in all likelihood you will not see it for very long more. And on those walls were bison and pronghorn and mule deer and elk and caribou and black bear and a host of other species. And this was all at a time when America was driven by ideas of individualism, as you still are, by the idea of the right of the individual to do well and to have commercial gain unhindered by government, a time when religious attitudes firmly entrenched the notion that all people had dominion over nature, when at the time that even citizenship was being viewed as the preoccupation of individuals who took land from the wild and turned it into a domesticated agricultural version that they could live easily with. It was at a time when there were very few or no game laws. It was at a time when there were no university programs teaching wildlife science. It was a time when there were no state agencies. It was at a time where there were no funding mechanisms. It was a time where there were no academic journals dealing with these issues. And yet a handful of people, not just the people in the Boone and Crockett Club, or they were prominent, but a handful of them and others, set about to change the course of the history of this country in the matter of conservation. And somehow, they managed to build a system of conservation in your country that eventually became a model for the world. That included, yes, the sustainable use of wildlife, but also included the preservation of special places and special systems. That included a broad view of what wildlife was, not just species that could be hunted, but species that would never be hunted. That came to recognize that the great wild beauty of America was the actual system of art galleries and museums that did not exist inside buildings for you, as it did in Europe, but was actually played out in a wild, natural existence and landscapes.
All right. That's about halfway through, Danny. What do you think?
Well, I tell you what, an interesting comment that I picked up on was when he talked about having the mounted heads in New York City, and the tagline was, "Come see the vanishing animals, wildlife."
Yeah. That was talked about. Actually, I didn't record that part of. That was an introduction into him by somebody from MSU who introduced him.
Okay.
And they were talking about Boone and Crockett and how that kind of all formed in the 1870s with Roosevelt and four others in the formation of Yellowstone. But then this, I believe that was 1897 or 98. Or maybe early 1900s. I can't remember the date exactly. But anyway, that was what was going on.
Right.
The commercialization of wild food and selling it, and it was depleting it. And they took taxidermy mounts to New York City and said, come see the wildlife, the vanishing wildlife, because you're never going to see them again.
The bears, the elks, the caribou, the mule deer, the bison. Now, it's amazing to me that Teddy Roosevelt and company sat down around a table or whatever it was. They sat down and said, "We got a problem," and it's like
5 guys had the forethought to have what we have today.
There was no game laws, there was no monies to get brought in, there was no nothing, and they said, "Hey, we got a problem."
Right.
And that's usually how things work. You'll get a couple of guys that will spark something, and they'll sit down, and something will propagate from that.
Right.
And in this case, Teddy Roosevelt and company, and this is where it went.
Well, and you think about it, that was in the 1870s and 80s. They started formulating this plan, and then got Yellowstone up and going. The first, national wild area, sanctuary, or whatever you want to call it, a park. And to what we have today, and how long it took to get. I mean, that was in the like I said, 1890, late 1890s, early 1900s, when they had that display in New York City.
Right.
And it was still going on, and it was 20, 30 years before they, really got a hold of it and got what they needed to get going and started getting game laws implemented. I mean, but it's a long, like what he alludes to this later. It's the long haul. Conservation doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen over a couple of years.
I think what kind of got me a little bit was it does take a long time, but you got to start somewhere.
Right.
And it's kind of funny when you mentioned you're an expert if you have a goldfish.
Right.
But or you hunt ducks. But it's to me, you got to start somewhere. You're right. It is a long haul. It's like a logging project.
Right.
You're gonna have 3 types of benefits. You're gonna have immediate benefit. You're gonna have the midterm, and then you're gonna have the long term.
Right.
And
you're all different.
And they're all different. They're all aspects, but they're all different. And you got in the plan that you have looks at that. And we're talking out to 2040, I think, in my plan.
Right.
And here it is, the same thing. Conservation. It has a short term, a midterm, and a long term.
Right.
And you got to start somewhere. That's the key, I think.
You got to have a vision. You got to have a dream. You got to have people help you along the way, like minded. And some of the issues you have to deal with, like he mentioned in the beginning of the segment, was, emotional, political. cultural. Those are all things that go into it that can change in the ebb and flow of conservation. What it means, what we do here in North America, what we've set up, or what Teddy Roosevelt helped start, set the course of action for conservation. But what we do here necessarily doesn't work in Africa. It's a whole different dynamic over there. I mean, some of the general principles do work.
General principles, I think we could say that. General principles do work, but you have to go and look at the Western states. You have to go look at Africa. You got to go look at Europe. The bugs in Europe. Each plays a different dynamic, but there's a foundation of general principles.
Sure.
And it's just like, man, you got to start somewhere, and why not start with whatever the simple common denominator that you can provide and go from there. I think as you go along, you also got to watch out, though, because some people will do things with a hidden agenda.
Sure.
They will, I'll say, infiltrate you, and things will get twisted and changed on you, and then it turns out bad. And so it's like...
Do a little history reading. Are you alluding to what we talked about in the break a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. All I'm going to say, I don't want to throw names or anything out there, but do a little history on the beginning of what happened with when those five guys started the efforts in conservation, got Yellowstone running, and then look what happened in the West, and do a little history reading.
Right. You got to do a little homework and see how things started to portray, which was good, and then kind of follow the trail to what they have today.
Right. Yep.
It's just interesting.
It is. And he also said you got to have, he said, drive and desire. Adds fuel to the tank. You need that.
It helps.
Because it's a long haul.
And not just passion.
Yeah, because it's a long haul.
Right.
We've all got passion for deer hunting. A passion for deer hunting doesn't get you into the woods. You got to have the desire and the drive to get you there.
Right.
Otherwise you're not going to be there.
Absolutely.
So, but I tell you what, let's take another break here. We'll step outside. We'll come back. We'll get back into the lecture with Shane Mahoney. We'll be right back after this.
So what do you do when you've completely redefined the way bows are engineered? When you've reached the pinnacle and the band starts playing your victory song, you start a revolution out of thin air. Introducing the all-new PSE Carbon Air, engineered with true carbon technology to be the lightest high-performance bow in the world. Experience PSE. Experience performance.
Killer Food Plots have been helping property owners for over 20 years create premier whitetail habitat. Whether replenishing your soil with their all-natural Organics Fusion pellets or planting a premier KFP food plot seed blend to help your deer rebuild their bodies through spring and summer while supplying the much-needed high energy during and after the rut, you can trust that Killer Food Plots family and their products will help your deer achieve their full potential.
All right, back for the third segment of the show. We're going to join back in with Shane Mahoney at Michigan State University.
So, people say, we have faced challenges today. We're worried about Endangered Species Acts, and we're worried about how to manage our forests, and we're worried about whether animals are listed or delisted, and we're worried about, all kinds of issues. We're worried about CWD, we're worried about diseases in wildlife and transmission to people, and all of that seems completely out of our hands. It seems like we cannot make enough of a difference to win. But what was it about those people who launched this movement in this country so long ago? What was it that convinced people in the 1870s to set aside the lands of Yellowstone? What possibly could have been moving through their DNA, through their bloodstream, to get them to imagine that that was the thing to do at that time? And all of these other far-sighted views that these individuals had. I ask you a question. Do you believe that we today are asking those far-sighted questions? Or are we asking questions about smaller, closer issues and forgetting about the long-term implications of decisions we make today? Are we forgetting about what your country will look like and what Canada will look like 50 years from now, 75 years from now? Are we making decisions in this great system of conservation established in your country, inside these universities, inside these places of knowledge, and in our agencies and NGOs? Are we asking those kinds of questions that seemingly those individuals 150 years ago had to have been asking themselves, or we wouldn't have the system we have? If the answer is yes, we are, I want you to write me. I want you to write me and tell me that experience you've had. If the answer is no, then the question we have to ask ourselves is why not? Because if we don't, we will soon reach the world of 25 years and 50 years. And the question will be, this great idea of conservation, where will we have taken it? I think there are three problems facing conservation in this world. Every problem I have ever looked at in the conservation realm, I have come to the conclusion falls into one of these elements, spheres of influence. The first is that too few people care. Too few of us care. The second is that those of us who do care are divided. We bring out a particular perspective, we bring out a particular way of looking at conservation, and then we believe that that is the right way to look at conservation, and anybody else who has a different view is looking at it somehow in the wrong way. And the third problem we have in conservation is that we are running out of money to do the things that are necessary for the natural world. I think almost all of the other things fit there. And so the question is, if we have too few people who care about conservation, why is that the case? Why do too few people care? Why is it that in your last presidential election and the last federal election in Canada, that the issues of conservation were virtually nowhere to be seen? If we really believe that conservation is about the future of humanity, the future of the country, the future of your economies, the future of all of that, then how is it that in our political systems in Canada and the United States and elsewhere in the world, this great idea seems to be off the political table? Well, I think that's just another manifestation of the fact that too few people care, because I can assure you, if more people care and were outspoken about that feeling and that emotion and that commitment to conservation, you better believe it will be on the political table. So that leads to the obvious question, if I'm right, that too few people care. How do we make people care? How do we find a way to lead people, to inspire people, to have people care about the conservation of nature in the United States of America and in other nations around the world? Well, I come at this question in a lot of different ways. I come at this question and I ask myself, despite all of the efforts that we are making, despite all of the NGOs and all of the government programs and all of the things that we are exercising, we still feel that we need to do much more, and we have evidence to indicate that we need to do much more. We are losing species, we are losing populations. In the last 50 years, we've lost 50% of the vertebrate biomass on this planet. 50% in 50 years. World Wildlife Fund report released only 6 months ago, recently. Let's say it's wrong by a wide margin, it's still pretty frightening. So we still have a long way to go. What is it going to take to get us there? And why haven't we gotten there already? Well, I think there are a couple of reasons, and I think they are germane and they pertain directly to conservation leadership. First of all, Grinnell and Roosevelt and Muir and Pinchot were successful because they worked at capturing the hearts and minds of people in an emotional way. Roosevelt said repeatedly that I accept that the people of the United States of America may utilize the resources of this nation. I do not accept that any American should be free to use the resources of this nation in any way that impairs the enjoyment and equal sharing of those resources by the generations to come and the generations of Americans unborn. He tied the idea of conservation not to just images of wild creatures that many people had not seen, or to parts of the American West that only a handful of white Americans had ever witnessed. He tied the idea of conservation to the idea of citizenship, to the idea of nationalism, to be an American, to call yourself an American citizen. You had to be concerned for the conservation of these wild resources.
So, what do you think? I had to start the same way he started his segment.
People say. Interesting.
I made a few little notes as we're going along. The thing stuck out to me. Are we asking the small questions of today, or are we concerned about the long-term questions? When we think long-term for us, we always think 10 years, maybe 20 years down. Hey, I'm planning for retirement now, 15 years down the road.
In our sense of us, that would be long-term.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In sense of conservation, it would be longer than that. So that's a very good question. Are the right questions being answered? Mm-hmm. In today's society, what's the biggest thing? Immediate satisfaction.
Right. Take care of it now.
Take care of it now. And a lot of that happens, right? Mm-hmm. Something happens in the news. Something happens, protest, blah, 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 immediate reaction.
Well, something that's been going on, you and I have talked about this off the record, and I'll bring it up now because I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I mean, I do, but Anwar Providence, the Anwar section up in Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
There's talk of opening that back up for drilling.
Right.
Okay, long-term, short-term impact. Short-term, we're going to get oil, energy, be able to power whatever, help the country out. Long-term, how is it going to impact nature? I don't know. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not a scientist, so right. I don't know. I do know we need energy. I do know that if there's a safe way to do it, I feel we should be able to do it, but I just don't have all that information yet.
I think we need the energy. I think if it's regulated to the point where they have to be very careful with what they do, I think it can work hand in hand.
Yeah,
you just can't say no,
right?
Because
come up with a solution. A long-term solution.
A short-term, mid-term, long-term solution.
Yeah. How's it going to impact us?
Exactly. So, and that's one of the things. And like you said, and the kids of today, and even a lot of adults, they need that instant satisfaction.
Right.
They don't want to plant the seed and watch it grow for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
They want to plant the seed and skip to 3 months and boom.
Yeah. Well,
there you go.
Logging projects that we're doing. There's short-term, mid-term, long-term goals. There's always conflict about cutting. Well, what's this going to do to my hunting property? Well, yeah, there's going to be an impact.
Right.
And the first time I walked up, and I remember our camp manager, as I walked up and looked at a spot that my old hunting area, and I just went, wow. My eyes I was bug-eyed. He's like, he cautiously said, well, what do you think?
Right, exactly.
And I'm like, well, I see progress. I'm looking long term. Yeah, it's devastating. If you want to call it I don't see it as devastation. I see it as progress.
My forester asked me that same question in that same, almost that same
tone.
What do you think?
Right.
Because he said to me, he goes, Dan, especially with people that aren't always around, they're absentee owners, like right. I am kind of really.
Right.
And he says those are the people that he gets the most comments of because they're not seeing it every day.
Right.
They show up.
Boom.
And boom. I said, it's shocking, yeah. Expected? Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. But that's why I wanted you to send me pictures.
Right.
So I wouldn't be so shell-shocked.
Right.
I said, but it's progress. We got to start somewhere.
Right.
And
right.
It's already starting to grow back in spots.
Yeah.
So I'm not...
We've got sections that we logged this past winter, and we had to shut down because of the warm-up real quick. We're going to finish our logging this winter after rifle season. But there's sections that it was pretty much almost a clear cut. And right now the BAM is over 6-7 foot tall.
Exactly.
It grew back so quick, and that's great vegetation for deer,
Deer, grouse, bear.
Yeah, animals and critters hide in it and feed off of it, and it's you got to look at that long term, the long term versus the short term. I thought that was insightful. But he said the 3 problems with conservation today: Too few people care. Those who do care are divided, and we're running out of money. And how do we make the people care? He talks a little bit about that here at the end in the next segment, but how do we get to that point? There are too few people who care. Like you said, immediacy, kids.
Right. And look at what he said. He said about the political aspect, right? You don't see it on any political agenda, so nobody cares.
Absolutely not.
Until something goes very wrong. Then all of a sudden it becomes the biggest thing since sliced bread. Oh, my Lord, here we go. But it's always in the backs of minds of people in the outdoors. But on the big stage, it's not really bubbled up.
Right.
Right now, the biggest thing is your guns.
Right.
That ain't going anywhere. But it's just people need to care. And the people need to care today for the people of tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. One thing, we were at our co-op meeting back Labor Day, and we had MUCC's Anna Mitterling on there to give a presentation. I mean, she was talking about CWD, and it's going to be, maybe it wasn't there, maybe it's someplace else that I heard her say this, but it's not going to be a problem that we deal with for a couple of years to fix. It's going to be decades, plural, that it's going to take. It's a long-term effort, just like everything else in conservation. Long-term. You got to look at it long-term, not short-term, and get over that hump of trying to figure out how do we attack something. And I think we do. We look at things politically. We look at things in small numbers of years versus decades.
Right.
So
simple.
And the other thing I thought about, talking about, how do we get people to care? How do we start moving this forward? And I brought up a point at that meeting. I said, we're talking about the NRC, Michigan's NRC, Natural Resource Commission, not really listening to the DNR or to the people of the state. And I said, well, those people are appointed by the governor. What if outdoorsmen and women of this state got together as a coalition and formed an official coalition, a hunter movement, to elect a governor of this state that would work for conservation?
And are they making choices based on their background, who backs them? And are those decisions made for the short term, long term?
Yeah, exactly. So, and you should have seen the eyes that were raised. It was just like, wow.
Right, exactly.
Never thought about it. Yeah. Why not? Why haven't we thought about that? I mean, this is our livelihood.
I'll throw a shout out to Lincoln Roan. That's a guy who was passionate about something, got something moving, and now on Facebook has over 20-something thousand members.
Yeah.
And being a voice, potentially it's powerful to do that.
It is. It is.
That shows you it can be done.
Yeah, there's passion, there's fire, there's drive.
Yep.
So, all right, I'll tell you what, let's step outside, take our last break, come back, we'll listen to the last part of what Shane Mahoney had to say at Michigan State University, and then we'll discuss that when we come back. Be right back after this.
I shoot PSE because I like one pin to 40 yards.
I shoot PSE for the perfect combination of feel and performance.
I shoot PSE because you can shoot lighter poundage and increase arrow speed.
I shoot PSE for the fastest bows on the planet. I shoot PSE because my livelihood depends on my bow.
I shoot PSE because better engineering makes a better bow.
I shoot PSE.
I shoot PSE.
I shoot PSE. I shoot PSE.
Experience PSE. Experience performance.
Killer Food Plots have been helping property owners for over 20 years create premier whitetail habitat. Whether replenishing your soil with their all-natural Organics Fusion pellets or planting a premier KFP food plot seed blend to help your deer rebuild their bodies through spring and summer while supplying the much-needed high energy during and after the rut, you can trust that Killer Food Plots family and their products will help your deer achieve their full potential.
Welcome back, and now we're going to join Shane Mahoney for the last segment of his speech at Michigan State University on conservation.
Secondly, that team, that small, relatively small team of well-known people we know, were absolutely relentless. They simply would not stop. If it took 15 years to get a piece of legislation through on fur seals, that's what Grinnell did. If it took 20 years to stop the sale of wildlife, dead wildlife in this country, that's what it took and that's what they did. if it took repeated efforts and failures to accomplish these goals, that is what they did. It didn't matter that they were rich blue bloods from the American East. It didn't matter that they were politically connected. It didn't matter that they had the pens of journalism and they also had the offices of high power. They relentlessly pursued these ideas. And the third thing they did, out of many, was they did not differentiate between classes of wildlife or classes of people who cared about classes of wildlife. So yes, Roosevelt was a hunter. He loved to hunt. He was also an extremely keen birder. He was an individual who loved birds, loved them. There are all kinds of stories of him breaking out of his office, the Oval Office, and running out to hear the first warbler that had come back in spring. He had study skins as a child in the drawers of his bureau, where he kept study skins of birds and small nests filled with little mice. We make him out to be this individual who spent his life, doing good things, but mostly harvesting in the rugged outdoor life of the hunter and the hunter frontiersman. The truth of the matter is, he cared deeply about all of nature. And he didn't feel that he needed to compartmentalize his feelings for nature into big game versus, I care about birds, or I care about wilderness or whatever. He didn't shun John Muir when John Muir, who had the greatest wilderness prophet this country has ever produced, and who has left so much to us. Did Roosevelt say, we won't invite them to dinner? No, he and John Muir were friends. When John Muir formed the Sierra Club, he came to the Boone and Crockett Club, he came to Teddy Roosevelt, he said, I need your help about these issues in California. And Roosevelt and Grinnell and others said, John, we are so busy trying to protect Yellowstone and get that thing up and running properly and getting it to work properly, we cannot help you with that problem right now. So why don't you go form your own organization? And so he went and formed the Sierra Club. We have managed over time to somehow concoct the fantasy that these entities born out of the one communion of idealism were somehow created out of two disparate views of the world. A lie, at worst. Falsehood and myth, at best. Those men who formed the cornerstones of the conservation movement that all of us owe our positions and jobs and interests to, they did not partition. And the reason they did not partition was because in leadership it is not about power and authority and status and how many members you have. Leadership in conservation is about never forgetting that there's one objective. And that one objective is to keep the wild others with us in the greatest possible abundance, in the greatest number of places possible on the planet. Now I ask every one of you, and you may be parts of many organizations, good organizations, doing good work, but I ask you, are they focused on the universal issue that I have just described? Or are they focused on a sectoral part of that issue? And are they, from their dialogue and from their meetings, do you get the impression that they're always thinking about wildlife? Or do you get the impression that they're often thinking more about their organization, its structure, the number of members it has, how much money it can compile? I'm a member of many of them. I respect them. I work with them. But I know what it is going to take to get us moving forward for the next 25 and 50 years in conservation in this part of the world, let alone what it's going to take to solve the problems in Africa and parts of Asia. It will only be done and only accomplished by leadership that moves from the center and that brings people together, that builds coalitions, and never forgets what the objective truly is. We can throw around all the terms we want. Sustainable use, preservationism, protectionism. They're all meaningless to me. They're just bits of ingredient that go into the stew. They're not the meal itself. We need it all. We didn't just need it all 100 years ago. We need it all today. We need every one of those efforts working together to make the differences that we need to make. A great many times in these circumstances, I will hear people say that, a particular group or a particular view of conservation said, we are wrong because of this, but we believe they are wrong because of it. And we muddle up these debates to the extent that, as far as I'm concerned, we place ourselves in a circumstance where we cannot possibly get out of it. We cannot possibly solve these questions. I'll give you an example, because it's an important one. There's a great debate in the world of conservation about the whole idea of sustainable use versus the idea of protectionist approaches to wildlife. I call my organization Conservation Visions in the Plural because I am willing to embrace any idea that gives me hope for wildlife. And that is a man or woman who wishes to hunt or fish. That's a man or woman who is a poet by it. But they have ideas that they can contribute to the conservation of nature. I know that. But so often I hear these debates get ground down away from the leadership position to what I call an anti-leadership position. For example, many in the consumptive use world, the hunting world, will claim that it is people in the anti-hunting world who are responsible for the turmoil and the discussions that currently occur over the use of wildlife, and also not only wildlife, but other animals. That somehow a particular organization that's formed that believes in animal rights or animal protectionism are able to manipulate the minds of all of the people in the United States of America or somewhere else in the world and convince them of a particular viewpoint. And of course, this occurs vice versa. The truth of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, what's integral to the leadership for conservation to understand is that what is happening in society is that society is moving on a wide front, influenced by a myriad of influences, and is not at all controlled by one or two narrow viewpoints on any issue. We are a changing society. Rural America is not what it was 50 years ago. Family structures are not what they were 50 years ago. The aspirations of young people are not the same as they were 50 years ago. The cultural makeup of this nation is not the same as it was 50 years ago. And I could go on and on and on and on. And all of those pieces are changing the attitudes, the prevalent attitudes, the prevailing attitudes that are expressed by the American nation. We need to understand in this business of conservation that if we want to move that changing society in the directions that we believe are best for conservation and human livelihoods, that we had better stop breaking that complicated argument down into petty warfare between organizations, petty warfare between ideologies. We will do what Roosevelt, Cornell, and others so long ago did. We will do what John Muir did. We will do what Aldo Leopold did. We will do what Rachel Carson did, which is to keep our eyes and our minds on wildlife and what is best for them, the wild others who made us human. Without them, we wouldn't even have the bloody term, because we wouldn't know what to compare ourselves to. They made us human, and they are the target now, fortunately or unfortunately for them, and we will determine the difference there. They are now dependent upon us to keep them on this planet. What is at stake is not the winning of an ideological war over the partitioned belief systems in the conservation movement. I do not care what organization is involved. I do not care who leads it. I do not care what its pedigree is. I do not care how young or how old it is. That is not what matters. What matters is we need to explain to the American people and the Canadian people and the people of this world everywhere that what we are fighting for is the maintenance of creation. What we are fighting for is that there will always be the possibility, even if they never see it, of elk in alpine meadows in the morning sun, that there will be the chance of seeing grizzly bears moving on flats and through brilliantly colored shrubbery in the fall of Alaska, that we will be able to witness the huge ungulates that move across this continent, the great moose and the caribou and so on, that have enthralled and kept our lives conjoined with nature for so long and maintained so many of the cultures of mankind. It will be that there will be places left in purity, untamed, unbroken, unsullied for future generations. People can understand these ideas, but someone has to bring them to them. The American people at the turn of the 20th century were not clamoring for the conservation idea. It was brought to them. Brought to them by people who carried it in their hearts and carried it in their minds and refused to accept that the prevailing pressures against conservation would not succeed. You have, in this country, the greatest possible inspiration and the greatest possible reason to believe that we can do it again. We can do it even better, and we can plan for the conservation of nature in the United States of America and the rest of the world better than we currently are. To be defeated in this, ladies and gentlemen, to be defeated in this, is to lose ourselves. Because without them, not just the boy from Newfoundland, but without them, your lives will be empty of something irreplaceable. You may not think of the small bird that chirps in the morning on the way to school, on the way to class. You may not think so much of the deer you saw in the field that evening. You may not be preoccupied by these things. But I guarantee you, if we ever lose them, you will remark how silent and alone this world is. Leadership will take us the direction away from it. Thank you very much.
All right, so you've heard the entire thing. You've had time to kind of reflect on it as we go along. Last segment and overall, what's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'd like to really point out the fact that when he spoke, people listened.
It's kind of like E.F. Hutton.
Yep.
You didn't hear. I mean, we really cranked that audio to get it to play.
You didn't hear coughing, hacking.
No,
not really. It was
nothing.
very, and like you said, you enhanced the audio so you could, the people could hear it better. But it was quiet, and they were listening.
Yeah,
and so it was very well done, and left you with thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
well, my biggest thought is, what am I going to do?
This is my thinking. I've told you it now.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do?
Yeah,
you know, you going to think long term? You going to think short term? What are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Now you go out and you take care of business.
Yep.
Because, and he's right, without doing anything, the silence, you'll be alone. And we've talked about this, and what's the first person or somebody, when either they're out hunting or they're outside, and they'll tell you, wow, I heard the birds singing this morning.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I didn't hear anything this morning.
Right. You remember a while back, this was back, I think 2008 or 9, maybe 10. I was at deer camp doing a coyote hunt. We had wolf tracks on the property that morning, and it was the first time I'd ever had that encounter.
Right.
And I found that out after the morning hunt on the way back in. But the thing that struck me was I didn't hear a single bird chirp. I didn't see a bird. I didn't hear a chipmunk or see a chipmunk or a squirrel. I didn't even see a deer. I saw absolutely zero animals and heard zero animal noises, and the silence was deafening.
Yeah, and think about that. If we don't do nothing, imagine that being the norm.
The norm, yeah.
Going outside and nothing.
It'd be, no dogs running around, no cats in your house.
It would be an injustice for us not to try to do anything.
Just your domestic animals, let alone your wild critters.
Right, exactly.
So
very good, very well done, and awesome.
There's more to this that we don't have time for. There was question and answer, and actually only one question got asked because of the time. It took them about 15, 20 minutes to answer.
It wasn't a simple question, obviously.
Well, basically the question is, a lady asked, well, you say, not everybody's the leader. There's only so many leaders, but you can be an individual leader. How do we take this message to the masses and make an impact? And he answered that. He answered it quite well. And I tell you, maybe we'll play that next week.
Yeah, we'll play it next week, and
and expand upon this whole idea.
Exactly.
Of conservation.
Just, this show's been a little different than our typical you and I going at it and talking about things.
Yeah.
But it's also people. We got to look to the future.
Absolutely, and not just tomorrow. But look ahead. Look ahead at not just your kids, but look ahead at your grandkids, your great grandkids, and their kids. Look at what you can do that's going to impact 50 to 100 years down the road. Looking back at what those 5 guys did in the 1870s and 80s. Without that, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this today.
No, we wouldn't.
Who knows what we'd be doing?
And one thing that he did say, and you got to point out, is they were told no.
Several times.
But they kept on going. And if it took 5 years, 10 years, 15 years to get legislation or whatever they were trying to push through,
they kept
at it.
Yeah.
They just didn't go at it and go, we're done.
Who do we see doing that right now for us here in Michigan?
You got
Lincoln Roan.
Lincoln Roan. They went at it. They went at it hard last year, and they were told no. But did that stop him?
No. Nope. He's back at it.
He's back up on the horse, and he's riding into next year and trying to think of different ways to go, but keeping at it.
Yeah.
Not saying no, not closing up the Facebook page
Yeah.
and saying, we're done. It was good. Have fun.
Yeah.
No, we're going to keep at it. We're going to try to add more members, try to get the word out here in Michigan, try to get into the ears of the right people that need to be heard, and something will happen. You just got to keep going.
Yeah, you got the passion, the drive, the desire. Use that to move forward and make a positive change. And tell as many people as you can. Share the word. Don't browbeat them with it. Don't tell them what they have to do. And like I said, next week we'll have
we'll go
his
over
rebuttal or his answer to that question on the show.
And that's another important point that to the people out there, when you talk with other people, they have opinions.
Absolutely.
And because they have an opinion doesn't make them right, wrong, or indifferent.
Right.
It's they have an opinion.
Yeah.
Just like you have an opinion. Look in the mirror, right?
Yep.
You both have opinions. Agree to disagree. That's the simplest form to do it. And tell them in a way, don't have to be belligerent. You don't have to be whatever. You tell them in a way that just says, hey, this is the way I believe. Think about it. Think about it.
Yep. And tell me how you believe and why you believe that way. And let's see where the facts lie, and let's see if we can make this work together.
A gentleman's debate.
Exactly. How many times do we sit and scream and yell and browbeat each other? That's the problem when emotion gets in the middle of it.
And that happens in organizations all the time.
Sure it does.
And that
our own worst enemy.
And that leads to bad things. And being narrow focused and not listening to other people, or not, as he said, the world is constantly changing. So as a group, whatever that group might be, if you don't change, you're going to stay that group, get smaller, and eventually you're just going to go poof into nothing.
Because everybody's going to die out.
And exactly.
We've all been part of or are part of groups
that are like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether they're outdoor groups or whether they're just groups in general.
Right.
So you need to...
you can even take it as simple as a knitting group.
Yeah.
If you don't teach people to knit, the knitters that become older knitters just die off, and nobody knows how to do it.
Right. And we see that today. We see that so much of that today in different avenues. So, all right. Well, I'll tell you what. It's Saturday afternoon, and for those of you who listen to the podcast, we are going to do a live stream. So go back and listen to that as well on our Facebook page. Danny will repost that on Wednesday on Vimeo and YouTube. We're just going to have a general discussion here and kind of open it up to anybody who might be online. So check that out as well. But we'll be back next week. I'll be coming back from deer camp.
And I'm excited for your stories.
We'll see. I'm cautiously optimistic.
It's going to be a good week. It's going to be cold.
It's going to be cold. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
Going to keep my fingers crossed and hope my arrow flies true.
That's right.
So, all right. That'll do it for us this week, folks. Until next time on the Up North Journal. This episode was brought to you by PSE Archery,
Black Eagle Arrows,
Fourth Arrow Camera Arms,
Wind Scent Vapor Hunting Scents,
Killer Food Plot Seeds, Attractants, and Supplements,
Cabela's,
Spot Shooters,
Antler Action,
Family Traditions Tree Stands,
and Badass Slingshots.
Thanks for listening, and join us again here next week. Until then, remember, as we always like to say, if you're out on the water or in the woods, shoot straight and be safe. Until next week on the Up North Journal.